In 1823, a trapper named Hugh Glass was mauled by a grizzly, left for dead, and crawled over 200 miles through frozen country to survive. He made it because he knew things we have completely forgotten. The men who trapped beaver in the Rocky Mountains faced 40 below nights with nothing but wool, fur, and hard-won knowledge. Number 14 on this list quietly saved more lives than any rifle they carried. And number 3 sounds like a myth until you understand the science behind why it works. These skills were passed hand to hand around campfires, never written down, and when the fur trade collapsed, most of them vanished with the men who knew them. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to learn kept human beings alive in country that killed the unprepared. Let's count down. Number 25, pine needle tea against the winter sickness. Long before anyone understood vitamins, mountain men knew that months of eating nothing but meat did something terrible to a man. Gums bled, teeth loosened, old wounds split open. They called it the scurvy, and it killed slowly through the long white months when no green thing grew. The remedy was simple and free. A trapper stripped a handful of needles from a spruce or white pine, dropped them in boiling water, and let them steep into a bitter, resinous tea. That single cup carried more vitamin C than a whole meal of meat ever could. Indigenous peoples taught this to the first French voyageurs, who passed it down the trade. A man who drank his pine tea kept his teeth and his strength. A man too proud to bother often did not see spring. Number 24, snow goggles carved from wood. There is a blindness that comes not from the dark, but from too much light. When the sun struck the endless snowfields, the glare burned a man's eyes until they swelled shut, streaming and useless, sometimes for days. In open country, a blind trapper was a dead trapper. So the mountain men borrowed a trick from the tribes of the far north. They carved a strip of wood or bone to fit across the face, cutting only a thin horizontal slit for each eye. The slits let in just enough light to travel by while blocking the murderous glare off the snow. Some rubbed charcoal beneath their eyes to cut the reflection further. The same reason ball players streak their cheeks today. A man could shape a pear in an hour with his knife, and those who skipped the trouble learned in agony exactly why it mattered. Number 23, reading the sky before it turned. A blizzard in the high country did not announce itself, it arrived. A man caught in the open when the wind rose could freeze. Within sight of shelter, he could no longer see. So the mountain men learned to read the sky like a page. A ring around the moon meant weather within a day. Sundogs, those bright false suns burning on either side of the real one, warned of bitter cold and coming storm. When smoke from the morning fire hung low and refused to rise, wet weather was near. When the birds fell silent and the horses grew restless, a man made camp early and dug in deep. The mountains gave warnings to those who knew how to listen and killed those who did not. Number 22, bear grease against wind and frostbite. The wind in the high country did not just chill a man, it flayed him. Exposed skin cracked, split, and froze, and a frost-bitten face could turn to blackened ruin. The trapper's answer was rendered bear fat, thick and yellow, saved from every kill and carried in a horn. A man smeared it over his cheeks, nose, and the backs of his hands before setting out into a gale. The grease sealed the skin against the wind and slowed the loss of heat, the same principle behind the wax cold water swimmers use today. It stank and left a man shining like a greased hog, but it worked, and it kept leather supple and a rifle stock waterproofed besides. Nothing from a bear was ever wasted, least of all the fat that stood between a man's face and the frost. Number 21, the fire reflector wall. A campfire in the open throws half its heat uselessly into the night. A freezing man could sit an arm's length from good flames and still shiver because the warmth was streaming away into the dark. The mountain men fixed this with a wall. They stacked green logs, piled stones, or leaned bark against a frame on the far side of the fire, building a surface that caught the heat and threw it back. Sit between the wall and the flames, and a man was warmed from two directions at once. Better still, he set the reflector on the windward side so it broke the wind and bounced the heat in a single stroke. With his shelter behind him and the reflector before him, a trapper sat inside a pocket of warmth while the temperature outside dropped past anything a modern man would believe survivable. A pile of logs arranged with knowledge became the difference between a long night and a last one. Number 20. Grass-stuffed smoked moccasins. Wet feet in winter were a death sentence, plain and simple. Frostbite took the toes first, then the foot, then the man. Buckskin moccasins soaked through in minutes on wet snow, so the mountain men learned to stuff them. They packed dry grass, cattail down, or shredded bark between the sole and the foot, and again around the ankle. The stuffing trapped warm air and wicked moisture away, and when it grew damp, a man simply pulled it out and packed in fresh. Smoking the leather over a fire before wearing it hardened the hide and helped shed water. A careful trapper carried spare stuffing the way we carry spare socks. Dry grass, free for the gathering, kept feet warm in country that took the feet of careless men. Number 19. Sleeping in a star, feet to the fire. How a man slept in the cold decided whether he woke. The mountain men had a system, learned from the tribes. Several men would lie in a wheel, feet pointing inward toward a low fire, bodies radiating out like the spokes of a star. Everyone's feet, the first to freeze, stayed nearest the coals, and the arrangement let one man wake, feed the fire, and lie back down without disturbing the rest. A trapper alone did the same with his dog, curling around the animal for the heat of another living body. On the coldest nights, that dog was worth more than a blanket, and it woke a man at the scent of a grizzly or a raiding party. Sleep was not rest in that country. It was a discipline, and it had rules that kept men breathing until dawn. Number 18. Melting snow, never eating it. It seems the simplest thing in the world. A man is thirsty, snow is everywhere, so he eats a handful. In the deep cold, that mistake could kill him. Swallowing snow forced the body to spend its own precious heat, melting the ice inside, dropping the core temperature, and hurrying a man toward hypothermia. Worse, it barely quenched thirst, since a fistful of snow yields only a thimble of water. The mountain men knew better. They melted snow in a kettle by the fire, or filled a water skin and carried it inside their coat against the body until it thawed. A dehydrated man in the cold thought poorly, tired fast, and froze quicker, so water mattered as much in winter as in the desert summer. The greenhorns who ate snow to save the trouble slid quietly toward death while feeling like they were doing everything right. Number 17. The capote, a coat cut from a blanket. When the fur trade reached its height, no garment was more prized than the capote. A trapper took a heavy wool blanket, often a striped Hudson's Bay point blanket, and cut and stitched it into a hooded coat that fell past the knees. The genius was in the wool. Even soaked through, wool holds heat where cotton kills, and the thick blanket trapped a deep layer of warm air against the body. The hood shielded the face, the long skirt covered the legs, and a sash cinched at the waist sealed the warmth inside. A man could sleep in his capote or wrap himself in it against a storm. The stripes even told him its weight and warmth at a glance. Simple, tough, and warm when everything else failed, the capote was the coat that conquered the mountain winter. Number 16. Snowshoes to walk on top of the world. Without them, deep snow was a trap. A man broke through to his waist with every step, exhausting himself in 100 yards, sweating in a way that would later freeze and kill him. With snowshoes, that same man walked lightly across the surface, spreading his weight over a wide woven frame so the snow held him up. The mountain men learned the craft from the northern tribes, bending green wood into a frame and lacing it with strips of rawhide called babiche. A good pair let a trapper run down game floundering in the drifts, check a trapline miles long, or flee an ambush across country that swallowed his pursuers. The man who could walk on the snow instead of fighting through it multiplied his range, saved his strength, and turned the deep winter from a prison into a hunting ground. Number 15. Caching supplies beneath the frozen ground. A trapper could not carry everything, and he could not leave his powder, his furs, or his winter food where a bear or a rival might find it. So he learned to cache. The word itself, from the French cacher to hide, became pure mountain slang. A man dug a deep bottle-shaped pit, narrow at the top and wide below, lining it with dry branches and hides to keep the damp out. In went the furs, the extra lead, the pemmican, sealed tight. Then he replaced the sod, scattered the loose dirt in a stream so no mound betrayed the spot, and drove the horses across to erase all sign. Weeks or months later, he returned to a hidden larder, safe from thieves and weather alike. A well-made cache could keep goods for a year. Kit Carson and Jim Bridger both trusted their winter survival to holes in the ground that no one else could find. Number 14. Carrying the fire through the night. Here is the skill that saved more men than any rifle. In a world with no matches, striking a fresh fire in wind and wet could take a frozen, exhausted man an hour he did not have. So the mountain men learned never to let the fire die. At night, they banked it, raking the coals into a tight pile and covering them with a thick layer of ash. The ash smothered the flames but held the heat, and in the morning, a man scraped it away to find live embers waiting to be breathed back to life. Traveling, a trapper carried fire itself, tucking a smoldering coal into a horn packed with punky rotten wood or dry moss, feeding it just enough to keep it alive for hours. That single glowing ember, nursed through miles of snow, meant that when he stopped for the night, he had warmth in minutes instead of a desperate fight in the dark. Fire, once earned, was never carelessly spent. Number 13, the golden rule: never let yourself sweat. Of all the hard lessons the mountains taught, this was the one that separated the seasoned from the doomed. A man working hard in the cold heats up and begins to sweat, and sweat is water. And water against the skin in freezing weather draws the heat out of a man faster than the wind ever could. So the veterans worked deliberately. They peeled off a layer before climbing a ridge, then put it back on the moment they stopped. They set a pace they could hold without breaking a sweat, no matter how the greenhorns hurried ahead. Wet from the inside was every bit as deadly as falling through the ice, and far easier to do by accident. A man who kept himself dry stayed alive. A man who soaked his shirt with his own effort often froze inside his own coat, undone by nothing but his own haste. Number 12, choosing the camp the wind could not find. Where a man stopped for the night mattered as much as anything he carried. A beautiful open flat was a killing ground when the wind rose in the dark. The experienced trapper read the land instead. He looked for a hollow out of the wind, a thick stand of timber, the lee side of a ridge, or a great fallen log, anything that broke the merciless flow of freezing air. He wanted deadwood nearby for fuel and unfrozen water within reach, but never so close to a stream that the cold air pooling in the bottom would settle over him in the night. He avoided the base of steep slopes where snow could slide and the open tops where the wind ran wild. 10 minutes spent choosing the right spot bought a warmer, safer night than any amount of firewood could. The land offered shelter freely to the man who knew how to ask. Number 11, trapping beaver beneath the ice. The whole reason a man endured that country was the beaver, and the beaver did not stop for winter. When the ponds froze over, the trappers went right on working, and the cold water sets were the hardest labor in the trade. A man waded into water so cold it stole his breath, or chopped through ice to reach the beaver's underwater runs, setting his heavy steel traps below the surface. He staked each trap so a caught beaver would drown quickly, and baited the set with castoreum, the beaver's own scent, dabbed on a twig above the water. Then he climbed out into the freezing air with soaked limbs and did it again at the next set, 12 times a day. The winter pelts were the thickest and most valuable, a single prime plume worth $4 to $6 back east. Men suffered brutally for those furs, and the ones who mastered the icy sets grew rich if they survived to spend it. Number 10. The snow shelter that saved the stranded. When a man was caught far from camp with a storm coming and no timber for a lean-to, the snow itself became his salvation. Deep snow, packed and hollowed, is a shockingly good insulator. A trapper would pile snow into a great mound, let it settle and harden for an hour, then burrow into the side and hollow out a chamber just big enough to lie in. Inside that white shell, sheltered from the wind and warmed by nothing but his own body heat, the temperature climbed far above the deadly cold outside. He poked a small hole in the roof for air, blocked the entrance behind him with a chunk of snow, and rode out the storm in a cave he had built with his hands. The tribes of the far north had refined this for generations. The very thing trying to kill a man became the thing that kept him alive. Number 9. Reading frostbite before it took the flesh. Frostbite did not hurt at first, and that was its trick. It stole a nose, an ear, a set of toes, while a man felt nothing, until the damage was done and the flesh was dead. So the mountain men learned to watch for it, in themselves and in each other. Skin gone white and waxy, a patch that had stopped feeling cold and started feeling nothing at all. These were the warnings. The moment a man spotted it, he acted. He warmed the frozen part slowly against living skin, tucking frostbitten fingers into an armpit or against the belly of a companion, never rubbing it with snow as the old myth advised. And once a part was thawed, it could never be allowed to freeze again, or it would be lost for certain. Traveling in pairs, men watched one another's faces for the telltale white patch. That watchfulness cost nothing and saved countless fingers, toes, and lives. Number 8. Bone broth and marrow for the deepest warmth. Meat filled a man's belly, but the mountain men prized something richer still, the marrow inside the bones and the fat-laced broth boiled from them. On a bitter night, a trapper cracked the long bones of a buffalo or elk, scooped out the soft marrow, and ate it eagerly, or dropped the shattered bones into a kettle to simmer into a hot, greasy broth. That marrow was almost pure fat and energy, the most concentrated fuel in the whole camp, and it stoked a man's inner fire like nothing else. A cup of hot broth spread warmth from the stomach outward, comforting a frozen man in a way plain meat never could. In a place where the body burned calories just to keep from freezing, the fatty heart of the bone was survival in its richest, most welcome form. Number 7. Brain tanning hides into warm, living leather. Every scrap of clothing a mountain man wore, he or his indigenous companions had to make from the animals he killed. And turning a stiff, raw hide into soft buckskin was one of the great skills of the frontier. It began with scraping the hide clean, then working into it a paste made from the animal's own brain, cooked and mashed. Nature provided almost exactly enough brain in each animal to tan its own hide, a fact the tribes had known for thousands of years. The paste softened the fibers, and hours of stretching and working the leather by hand made it supple. Finally, the hide was smoked over a smoldering fire, which colored it, waterproofed it, and kept it soft even after soaking. The result was clothing that breathed, moved, and lasted, warm buckskin no factory of the day could match. A man dressed in well-tanned hides wore the knowledge of a whole people on his back. Number 6. The buffalo robe, the warmest bed in the West. When night fell and the cold pressed down, nothing a mountain man owned was more precious than his buffalo robe. A prime winter buffalo hide, taken when the animal wore its thickest coat and tanned with the fur left on, was a slab of insulation unlike anything else in the mountains. A man rolled himself inside it, fur turned in against his body, and slept warm while the world outside froze solid. Laid over a bed of pine boughs to keep him off the killing cold of the ground, the robe made a nest that held its heat through the longest night. By day, it served as a coat, a saddle blanket, or a windbreak. Heavy to carry and hard to earn, the buffalo robe was still the single most valued piece of winter gear a man could own. Number 5. Eating fat to keep from starving on a full stomach. Here is a truth that has killed men who did everything else right. In the deep cold, a body devouring nothing but lean meat can actually starve. The trappers knew it and dreaded it, though they lack the name we use now, rabbit starvation. Lean game gives protein, but almost no fat, and a body burning through it in the cold demands fat and energy the meat cannot provide. Men who ate their fill of lean rabbit grew weak, sick, and gaunt, their bodies failing even as their bellies were full. The mountain men craved fat above all else, hunting the fattest animals, saving every scrap of tallow, eating marrow and grease with a hunger that startled newcomers. Deep in a winter that burned calories just to keep a heart beating, fat was the line between surviving and slowly wasting away with food still in hand. Number 4. The lean-to shelter with a bed of coals. When a man had timber and time, he built real shelter, and the design was a masterpiece of simple thinking. A lean-to, a single slanted wall of branches and bark angled against the wind, caught the heat of a fire built in front of it and cradled a man in warmth. But the veterans went further. Before setting up for the night, they built a large fire directly on the spot where they meant to sleep, let it burn down, then raked the coals aside and laid their bed over the warmed earth. The ground itself gave off heat for hours, warming a man from below, while the fire and the reflector warmed him from before and behind. A thick layer of pine boughs kept the cold of the earth away and made a mattress that smelled of the forest. Wall, fire, reflector, and heated bed together built a pocket of warmth a man could survive in through cold that would have killed him in the open in an hour. Number 3. Pemmican, the food that would not quit. Here is the one that sounds too simple to be true. The mountain men and the tribes before them made a food that could last for years without spoiling, packed more energy per ounce than almost anything known, and carried a man through winters when no game could be found. They took lean meat, sliced it thin, and dried it hard until it snapped like a stick. Then they pounded it to a coarse powder, mixed it with an equal weight of melted fat, and often folded in dried berries. Poured into a rawhide sack and left to harden, it became pemmican, a dense brick of pure survival. A man could live on a few ounces a day, eat it raw, or drop it in hot water to make a stew. It did not freeze solid, did not rot, and did not fail. Modern scientists studying survival rations still marvel at the ratio the tribes worked out by hand, roughly half fat, half protein, the near-perfect fuel for a body fighting the cold. Whole expeditions crossed a frozen continent on nothing else. It was the original energy bar, and nothing we buy today truly beats it. Number 2, wool, layers, and the deadly truth about cotton. The mountain men dressed in a system, though they never called it that. Close to the skin, wool, then buckskin, then the heavy wool capote, and the buffalo robe overall. And the veterans lived by an iron rule that greenhorns learned too late. Wool keeps a man warm, even soaking wet, while cotton, once damp, becomes a wet rag that pulls the heat straight out of the body. Cotton kills, the old hands said, and they were right. Just as important was the layering itself. Several thinner layers trapped more warm air than one thick coat, and a man could add or shed them to match his effort, peeling off before he sweated and piling on the moment he stopped. Dressed right, in wool and hide and fur, A man walked through cold that would have finished a fool in a fine cotton shirt in a single night. Number 1. Fire, the one skill that ruled them all. Every other skill on this list bought a man time. Fire gave him life. To a mountain man, the ability to make fire anywhere, in wind, in wet, in the killing cold, with numb and shaking hands, was the single skill that stood above all others, and he never traveled without the means to do it. His flint and steel rode in a pouch at his belt, along with char cloth, scraps of linen, burned in an airless tin until they caught a spark at the first strike. He gathered his tinder before dark, shredding birch bark and cedar, splitting dead wood to reach the dry heart inside where the rain never touched. He built his little nest, struck a shower of sparks into the char cloth, and breathed a coal into flame with the patience of a man who knew his life depended on it. Fire cooked his food, melted his water, dried his gear, warded off the wolves, and held back a cold that wanted him dead. Of every hard-won skill these forgotten men carried, this was the first they learned and the last they would ever give up. There they are, the 25 skills that kept the mountain men alive in country that killed the careless. What strikes me most is how little any of it cost. Not gear, but knowledge, passed hand to hand around campfires and nearly lost forever. Which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments and tell me which forgotten skill you think we ought to bring back. These men knew how to live where we would barely last a night. Now at least a little of what they knew lives on with you.